our willingness to take shortcuts in the business world, and I mean, even consuming words and the actual meaning of words when it's not really true. So I would be very careful about using the word or labeling product regenerative, but for sure collaboratively move towards that vision. Yeah, that's.
Do you see a need for more standardization here? I mean, obviously Patagonia has kind of set their stall out on at least on the organic material side, and we can talk about other materials as well, of course. But Eva, do you believe it's an area that needs more standardization, or is it better as a philosophy?
No, I think we have to combine the philosophy and the holistic meaning of the word, but then add metrics and frameworks for it, for sure. Okay. But in order to evolve, I don't think we can rely only on metrics. But really, it has to become much more of a journey which is based on philosophy and a true willingness to move into a completely different way of doing business.
Thank you. We'll
otherwise, regenerative as an expression will be just as meaningless as maybe sustainability has become. Don't you think?
Well, I think there's a risk. I mean, it's always about demonstrated performance, isn't it? It's increasingly about impact. What can we show has happened as a result of this? This is what I always think when I see someone else has become certified as a B Corp. I always think, okay, well, what were you going to do anyway versus what have you done differently? And why do you need somebody else to tell you what you're doing? And there's always a bit of opposition to that in some circles. On the other hand, benchmarking, metrics, standards, of course, helpful in driving performance in supply chain. So there is that balance to strike, I suppose.
And to guide the consumer together. I mean, to educate each other and collaborate across industries, but among peer-to-peers or colleagues in the business, but then also to include the customer on that journey.
Well, absolutely.
In this shift of mindset, in the understanding of the meaning of the words and so forth.
Yeah, we'll come back to talk about customers. I mean, there's so much to discuss on that, isn't there? Eduardo, let me turn to you. PEFC may need a couple of sentences of explanation for those who aren't familiar with it. We work with you in our other areas of agriculture and forestry and so on. Of course, regenerative is a term that's always been applied to those producing your products, I suppose. But curious to know how what your views are on how it's evolving and can be used more in the fashion and apparel sector. So, Eduardo, over to you and welcome. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Eduardo.
Good morning or good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for joining this excellent conference and panel. Just to PFC, out of the Rio discussions nearly 30 years ago, one of the elements that was identified in order to ensure sustainable forest management, forests covered 30% of the world and is the most biodiverse ecosystem on Earth, on the terrestrial part of Earth, of course. And PFC is one of the basically two systems of certification that were established in this moment, and our certification system corresponds to 3/4 of the certified forests, which are about 10% of the world, but those who supply more important wood and other forest resources. I mean, on the discussion you just started, which is very important, I would say that the common point is bioeconomy. I mean, eventually, we have been, before the Industrial Revolution, be totally consistent with bioeconomy and with climate change. It has been the change to fossil energies and strong mineral support, be concrete, be all kinds of iron and aluminium and so on, that have generated enormous amount of energy in order to transform these raw materials. They were very efficient on one hand, but had created our climate change. threat. So in this moment that we want really to commit all against climate change, just the recent conference led by President Biden is a clear example. It is not only important to change the origin of our energy towards renewables, but also to reduce the embedded energy. And in that sense, construction sector, textiles and plastics are the three big issues, together with the reduction and improvement and passing towards renewable energies. And in that sense, bioeconomy, sourcing out of raw materials that came from nature through sustainable management of natural resources and cultivations are crucial. There's a lot of research to be done. And from all these communities, the one that has not today the biggest size is for sure the building sector, but the biggest growth, especially in emerging economies and developing countries, is textiles. And in that sense, of course, trying to avoid that this big growth is on the hand of plastic-based textiles, but move back to has been all the time either agriculture, livestock, or forest-based fiber is a key issue, because this would avoid the problem of microplastics on one hand, because they will be much better recyclable and would not generate microplastic, and they would have much less energy demand, and by this CO2 emissions. And in that sense, of course, we have about a third in this moment of natural fiber supplies of our textile consumption, and wood is since 100 years through viscose an important element. For sure, bamboo has a strong potential as well, and for sure research can bring us new plants that can be either sourced from forest or from agriculture that we have even still not cultivated. So we think there is a big potential. And going then to the specific question of regenerative, this is not a name that is generally used in forest, and our mandate in PFC is on forest, despite we are seeing that there is a need for sustainability and certification also in other natural resources. But in this moment, that doesn't exist peers for our side. There we have basically two lines. The first is the restoration of degraded forest. We have extended degraded forest due to histories of grazing, fire, wood collection, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and other reasons. And on the other hand, we have the issue of forest landscape restoration, who has identified huge areas of the world that can be restored, in a big part in a mixture with agriculture or with pasture land, not just poor forest, and this would have huge carbon sequestration, carbon mitigation potential, and also livelihood potential. And this is the two areas where we are committed, and we think there will be for sure a strong regenerative contribution if we are able to find all these opportunities, especially in the restoration side, where there are pledges up to 300 million hectares in the world, which would increase the forest cover of the world in 7% during these the last and the present decade.
Thank you. When we talk about restoration, it's something that is happening, but happening slowly. And in some ways, you might say it's a more effective and better way to describe offsets, which is often discredited as a term, isn't it? You know, it's a term people don't like talking about because it can mean, well, schemes you don't always have visibility of. But when we talk about restoration, that's really regeneration in process, isn't it? That's regeneration happening in front of you, Eduardo. Do you see more and more interest from, say, the cotton sector or cotton producers or cotton users, such as the brands at this event, in meeting climate objectives through focusing on restoration of land and forests and so on, because it is so important? But I wonder if it's still something that's a bit neglected when brands think about their GHG footprint. What do you think?
Well, the basic pledges has been done by the developed countries and in certain extent also emerging economies. And of course, big players, also philanthropic organizations and so on. Basically, I think it's very important to find win-wins. I mean, there are really exciting examples in many parts of the tropics of agroforest solutions, and we might eventually have to pass them as well, be cotton, be linen, be other agricultural crops that can be combined. Think of coffee. Coffee is very strong, benefited by using not a very dense cover of trees that sequester nitrogen and avoid nitrogen fertilization, especially erythrina trees. And there are many other examples also in the Sahel using Faderbia, that this is an acacia that doesn't have leaves in the rainy period, so allows to work against the needs of water for agriculture. And this avoids erosion, soil and wind erosion. So I think there's also an important task of research, of identifying new opportunities, even in commercial agriculture, using more trees that would sequester CO2, that would reduce wind and soil erosion and provide some fertilization. And there has been too little work. But I also think, without being an agronomist, I'm a forester from profession, that for sure there are more raw materials than just cotton. Cotton is not an easy crop, and for sure, as we found, and our sector is strongly researching new products, not only viscose that is 100 years old. So there needs to be, there are lots of degraded land that could be used by agriculture for producing other new fibers. And for sure, we need to find a solution for wool. There's lots of wool that is today hardly used. All the sector around sheep has big problems since around 2000 due to the practically zero prices of wool. And we have to find solutions that reduce the problems that many people have with wool. And we cannot have an important raw material in this world of 7.5 billion people without using efficiently our raw materials. So that has to be also seen. And if our products are renewable and are organic, then we can, of vegetables or out of vegetable fiber, we can recycle them much better than is the case of the plastic-based products.
Thank you, Eduardo. Fascinating. Building on those points, Rachel, let me come back to you on those other materials. I mean, we hear a lot about organic cotton. We've been discussing it a lot on recent podcasts. We did one recently with Larry Pepper on Textile Exchange, talking about organic cotton and where it is. But what about these other materials that Eduardo mentions? How do they fit into your vision of regenerative? Sheep farming clearly is something that only suits certain geographies, for example. There's not, in certain areas of land, there's not much more you can do if you don't have forests than have sheep, because of the hillsides and so on. So how does wool and bamboo and some of these other materials fit into your regenerative thinking?
I would say, we got started with cotton in this space because that's like it's grown in a farm, it's an agricultural product. So we figured we could start there, because for us, regenerative really is about the regenerative organic agricultural practices. That's really what we're focusing on, is the soil health, the carbon sequestration potential, all of that piece. And so, yeah, our focus has really been on cotton when it comes to this regenerative work and this ROC work. And now, we're looking at the other fibers, thinking about kind of how they fit in. There's a lot of work being done by my colleagues on other teams, kind of looking, they're assessing materials all of the time, determining the best fibers, determining how to reduce our footprint, all of that. That work is really, really robust on our teams. And with wool, we've been working with the Patagonia wool standard and then with responsible wool standard. And the focus there has been a lot on animal welfare. And that's been a focus of a lot of work for the past few years. But I think we're still kind of thinking about how it all fits in with the regenerative piece with those other fibers. And yeah, so it's in process. It's something that we're working on. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Same question to you, Eva. Where do these non-cotton organic materials fit into regenerative for you at the moment?
Well, on the fiber side, what we're looking more at now is regenerative wool. We're not using cotton at all. And that's not only because of environmental reasons, but also for performance. We only make performance products. So in that sense, maybe cotton is fiber, but not for us. But wool, for sure, that is an area where we can see that it's possible, but it's also really important to get there, because the erosion and land system and how that is affected by sheep farming today is, of course, a very important issue to take responsibility for. And then in the longer perspective, we are keen on diversifying fibers so that we have a stronger or wider base to work on. And then a dream would be, of course, to do regional and bio-based, so that we can have a more holistic, sustainable or responsible value chain. And then regional practices, so I think in terms of mindset and actually seeing what's happening in your environment, that's also a way of shifting mindsets faster, of course, because what we do, the current system where we have global supply chains, we actually don't experience the impacts that we have on the other side of the planet. So I think we would move much faster towards regenerative. It was in our backyard. So I think regional is really important, but that's going to take a lot of time as well. I mean, but the fact is that, for instance, here in Sweden, there's a lot of wool that is thrown away every year, tons of it, because we prefer to, or just it's been the practice of getting our supply from Australia, and there's of course challenges with micron and so forth, but that's something we can solve. But it's just been, you know, business practice, business as usual would be to order it from somewhere else, but maybe we can work towards regional.
So you mentioned regional and moving closer to home, but wouldn't that impact your labor costs incredibly significantly?
Well, we've already taken a lot of decisions that do affect our labor cost in that direction. For this, and it's for the same reasons. We don't really. I completely understand your focus, and we have the same focus. We know that fiber is an important way for us to reduce our impact and improve as a company. So we focus on that. But zooming out and taking this holistic perspective again, we believe that the social aspects are just as important for creating a regenerative society. So in that sense, we already have moved a lot of manufacturing, or it's already in Europe, and where we feel like, well, I'm a mother. If my son goes working a summer job, I think that we should strive for a world where, just because I'm in Stockholm, I should be able to feel good about my son working at one of our suppliers, you know. And is that the case today? I had a question at a university. So your products, can somebody in a factory where you manufacture in the Baltic states, would they buy Houdini product? And that's, I mean, really nailing it down to what's problematic in this world. We have a rich part of the world where we create these beautiful products, and then we have another part of the world which we exploit, kind of. So yes, we have a lot of work to do, and regenerative must include that as well.
Yeah, we had a question here in the chat about regenerative and its inclusion of animal welfare and social issues. Arif Makdum is asking, is that how we differentiate between pure organic and regenerative organic, the inclusion of animal welfare and social fairness into ROC? Rachel, I suppose that's a fairly clear distinction with traditional organic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the inclusion of those two additional pillars, and then also specific, for ROC at least, it's about specific agricultural practices that are considered regenerative, like no-till, cover cropping, multi-cropping systems, composting, all of those things, which are often part of organic systems, but not necessarily always. And so that's why it's kind of like included in ROC as like written down as these are the things that we're requiring and expecting when we're thinking about regenerative. And so, yeah, I think it's the addition of those practices, and then the other two pillars of kind of looking at the whole system at the farm level, at least.
Yeah. Let me ask you about other agricultural products. One of my favorite Patagonia items to wear, which I basically would live in if I could, and I have, is my very light sort of liner duck down, goose down jacket, which of course is polyester outer and then duck down or goose down inside. It's incredibly light, you know, warm, cool. It's a wonderful piece of clothing. But the duck down or goose down, I can't remember which it is not regenerative yet. Is that part of your plans that will be? And then secondly, I suppose the other difficult question is, how do you talk to your customers about the non-organic material, which encases it, which is the polyester side? How do you talk about that? And I guess we're nowhere near talking about regenerative polyester. That's when we go into circular, isn't it? And we're into another technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really focusing a lot on recycled when it comes to those, like polyester and those outputs, and that's something that my colleagues are working a lot on. I don't quite remember the stat, but a very big percentage of our line now is all recycled, and so I think there's definitely a really big focus on recycled, so that we're not taking new virgin inputs, and it's all kind of recycled, and that component is really important, and we're definitely moving a lot more towards that. We're constantly kind of like redoing even classic products with recycled materials to reduce the impact, and so that's a huge piece of work. On the downside also, it's kind of, we've been focusing a lot on the animal welfare and working with different, traceable down standard and the other certifications that we work with. We're kind of working on how that incorporates into the regenerative conversation as well. But for now, it's been focused on those other certifications. So,
What I'm finding so interesting about this conversation is we haven't just focused on cotton. There's been a big focus on cotton, but we're bringing in these other materials, which is so fascinating. Eduardo, you mentioned viscose earlier. Viscose is a fascinating product. I went to see the world's most state-of-the-art viscose plant in Riau in Sumatra in, I think, September 2019. And I was pretty astounded at some of the numbers around the impact there. The APR rayon plant, 93 to 95% chemical recycling, a very different industry from one which emerged out of the technology innovations of the 1950s. Do you believe that materials like viscose and rayon are a big part of the future? And is there a real need for them to be telling their story better and to be pointing at their circular benefits as well as some of the other materials which are out there?
Yes, for sure. I mean, once we ensure that the resources are not depleted, in the case of viscose, we're speaking about forests, and we have also the social dimension in size, and it is in our backbone of PFC, because PFC was established bottom up from smallholders, communities, indigenous peoples, and so on, upwards, which is much more complex. It is also important to ensure significant returns for the people which are stewarding the land, in this case, forests. Forest owners, which, for example, in the European case, cover 60% of the forest, they need as well, and 60 million people, so they are normally small, maximum medium size, and sure, Eva knows a lot of them in your own country. They need also a return. If there's no return, then on the long term, there are not sufficient philanthropic people in the world who will preserve forests. And we have, not only in Europe, we have very clear evidence from research that the best preserved forests are those who are managed by indigenous and non-indigenous local communities. So in this sense, a return, once we ensure the sustainability of the resource, that we are not losing forests, is very important. And there is also very important not only that there's a return, but that we are empowering these communities, that we are creating capacity so that they can engage in the market through all kinds of schemes, outgrow schemes, agreements of the buyers and so on, so that they are able to produce in much more efficient way, and they are able to be important market partners, be for supply domestically, firewood or other materials, sawn wood, but as well as to supply to industry, could be pulp or could be textiles or building materials. So this is very important. I mean, I was following the discussion on sheep. It's true that in your country, in my country, excessive sheep hundreds of years ago created a deforested landscape, but today forests are recovering, and there's also a biodiversity linked to sheep. And if the value of wool is like zero, then at the end we have first to get rid of it, so it becomes a problem. And on the other hand, what we still have remaining sheep is basically for cheese. At least in my country, is basically Manchego cheese. So this is intensive sheep that we don't like, because this creates a problem. Extensive sheep is important to prevent forest fires and to preserve biodiversity and keep people on the countryside, not concentrated in big farms. So these kind of things have to be analyzed, not historically or generalizing, but looking on the specific locations. And for sure, if we want to avoid that all people run into the cities, and we have mega cities with big environmental issues, we have to ensure that people remaining in the countryside have also equal conditions for the future. And I think constructing the rural areas of the future in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia is a big challenge we have ahead of us, that they have also equal living conditions.
So do you see regenerative as a term playing a role there for forest products? Because we've got a lot of terminology bouncing around. You talked about bioeconomy. I see Anurag Gupta here talking about regenerative manufacturing. We've been seeing people in the chat talking a lot about circular. I can see how regenerative is starting to apply to cotton related to soil under the ROC. Where does it fit in your future paradigm, Eduardo? Are we going to see regenerative viscose, regenerative bamboo, or are these better off described in a different way? Because what we call things does seem to matter.
Yes, but unfortunately, we come from very segmented sectors. Imagine this discussion 20 years ago would not have happened. So we have to build up, and I comment to you that in certain way we have started in PFC to think that we eventually need peers in the fisheries, in the agriculture sector, and so on, because natural renewable resources are something very specific, have nothing to do with fossil ones. And in that sense, we need also in this building up connections with the other natural renewable resources, we need as well to come to a similar language, because we are, in certain way, we were born by different disciplines, and this generates a cacophony or bubbleism that we have to overcome. And I think eventually one of the first bridges has been the landscape approach that started about 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's very important. There were predecessors like the watershed perspective, which is also a kind of landscape approach. And I think this is the way we have to build up that from the forest and more environmental perspective, also the need to supply sufficient food for humankind is also acknowledged. And on the other hand, from the agricultural side, also these more environmental issues like soil, climate change, biodiversity are also thought. And then they need to have also this social dimension, how we can do this change towards regenerative, sustainable, however you want to call it. I think we have a clear vision, all shared, that this is also economically feasible on the short term, but it is also socially feasible on the midterm, that people don't have to go to the cities and can have also really equal conditions. And we have a strong weight also of applied research that needs to be done in order to find technical solution with common new fibers. And there are many other issues where research can give us important solutions.
Thank you. Eva, let me turn to you. These comments we're seeing from Haven Crane and Anurag Gupta talking about circular production being separate from regenerative production. And then Anurag is talking about how do we compare regenerative agriculture and regenerative manufacturing? Are we bandying around too many terms here? Should we be simpler about what we mean? Or is this kind of proliferation of language actually helpful in getting done what you say needs to be done, which is more responsible production closer to home? Eva.
I think that regenerative really has a place as part of the terminology, just like circular is. But I do believe that we have to have a common understanding of what we're talking about when we say regenerative and when we say circular. What I like the most about regenerative, apart from it being a very clear ambition of restoring and creating an environment that thrives, or a society that thrives, so stays intact or even improves for next generations, for instance, that is of course beautiful. But I also think that there's something additional in regenerative compared to circular, for instance. Circular tends to become a very technocratic only discussion, which is, I mean, it has to be the rational side as well, but I think sometimes we lack how circular can, become a vision for a better world or a thriving society for the future. But regenerative, to me, has the potential of actually being that narrative that can bring us together and collaboratively work towards it. I mean, I would like to see, and I think that as a company, we have the opportunity and responsibility to move towards regenerative business practices. We can also, and we should, enable regenerative ways of living your lives with our customers and users out there. But then there's something that we can only hope for and potentially help our politicians feel bold and secure enough to put in place regulation that is appropriate, because we also need regenerative politics. I think some of the things that we've been talking about today, pricing, for instance, it has to do with this predatory behavior and the predatory or degenerative societal frameworks that we have, the legal system, the financial system, and so many other things. And I'm not putting the blame on somebody else. I think we have to all take responsibility, but it would be beautiful to see regenerative politicians out there.
Regenerative politicians, yeah. I'm not sure.
Regenerative politics.
I'm not sure if I want to see too many UK politicians become regenerative in a biological sense.
Okay, no. But bringing in place regenerative policies anyways.
No, I totally agree. I was just being facetious. I'm imagining multiple Boris Johnsons here, and I'm having nightmares already. So I take your point. And I think what's interesting about what you say there, well, one of the many things, is that regenerative is a very optimistic term, isn't it? It's a proactive, optimistic term that people get excited about. We've done so many sessions on it in the last year or so, and it's one that people feel really passionate about. And my argument to my colleagues, many of whom have been in sustainability for decades, who hate the term because they think it's a recipe for greenwash, is that my argument is sustainability has failed as a motivational term. Regenerative is better. So let's use a better term. Having said that, Stefan's question here is a very good one. Is there a clear definition of regenerative? Rachel, as I understand it, the answer to that is yes and no. Yes, under the terms of the ROC, the regenerative organic certification, but no when it comes to lots of the other uses of regenerative. Is that right, Rachel?
I mean, I'm sure that there is a very specific, actual definition. I think it is being used for many, many different things in many, many different ways. And I think that's where there is concern that it can start to use everything and mean everything and nothing, right? So the way that we kind of understand it, right, is within this agricultural context of regenerating the soil, of kind of looking at the whole ecosystem, going back to kind of more traditional indigenous practices and ways of really farming alongside nature. And kind of, I think, farming the way nature intended is one of the kind of taglines. And so, I mean, yeah, for us specifically, when it comes to the agricultural practices and organic, that's really what we're looking at. I think the inspirational piece is really compelling. Our founder changed our mission statement, I think 2 years ago now. We're in business to save our home planet. And that kind of was it's this call to action that all of us are rallying around, that every single person at the company is thinking about how does our role help to save our home planet. And so that's really that's kind of for us that inspiration. And yes, we created this ROC and we really feel passionately about it. We're focusing a lot on agriculture and cotton. But, to your point, if regenerative is going to inspire people to make significant changes, that's amazing, right? That's what we all need to work together in order to achieve the ambitious goals that we have in order to make the changes that are so necessary. And so it's exciting, it's compelling, it's a little outside the scope of the focus specifically of my work in this area, but I really appreciate so much thought. I mean, that's what kind of got me excited about working in this space to begin with, is how do we use business to combat challenges that we've seen and actually make people's lives better. And so, if that's a tool to do that and to get, also consumers rallying around that, I think that's really exciting.
Thank you. We just to answer Stefan's question, we did a podcast I mentioned earlier, with Jeff Catch from the Rodale Institute, which I believe is on the Innovation Forum website. Perhaps one of my team could post the link. I think we just published it separately. In fact, it was a workshop we did as a build up to this conference on sustainable and regenerative. And we talked about the roadmap and the journey that the Rodale Institute had been on, and this big focus on soil health. And now what we're seeing, of course, is the whole thing is being much more co-opted, shall we say, by other approaches. Walmart's announcement it wants to be a regenerative company. I'm not sure they know exactly what that means yet. But for many people, we know what it means when it comes to soil health. I saw a chart the other day looking at some aspects of forestry, and Eduardo, you may want to correct me if I'm wrong, but it had 72% of the carbon was in the soil underneath the tree. yet the tree was the thing that holds the soil together. So the two have to work perfectly in that kind of bioeconomic approach. So it's a horses for courses approach at the moment, but if you want to focus just on soil health, there are some clear definitions there. Let's see what other questions we have before we close. I'm just going back to look at the chat function here. While we're doing that, I want to ask you all about the consumer engagement side. Eva, you've been very passionate advocate of changing the way we live, all of which I think we'd all agree with, and it's great to hear you say these things. How are you talking to your consumers about this, and where does regenerative fit in to customers of Houdini? What are they seeing from you about what you're asking them to do, and what you're telling them about regenerative or other aspects of sustainability in your work?
Well, we aren't talking that much about regenerative yet, because in terms of actually guiding our customers, because that would be, I mean, it wouldn't be relevant because we're not there. But we can help right now we can help our customers move towards a circular and more sustainable way of life. And there are projects where we're getting much closer to regenerative, which we're also talking about, partly or especially one in wool, where we, have wool that goes full circle. You can compost it, you can grow your vegetables, and you can eat your food out of that soil that is your worn out base layers. So that is as close as we have gotten to regenerative, and there we can share our vision of that, circular way of living, where we shop and use and live in partnership with nature, and what we use can also go back to nature and become nutrients or value there. But what we do speak about a lot is circular, and we have right now 87% of our products are circular by design, but it doesn't really help the world if those products are used in a linear fashion. I mean, either for a short amount of time and then thrown away, or ending up in the landfill because we're used to the linear way of using stuff and then discarding it. So it's more of an educational journey now towards this circular, which is a step towards regenerative, I would say. And we have lots of engagement, and the interest and concern about these issues is, exploding. I think we all experience that, but it's fantastic for us who've been talking about these issues since many years, just like some others, like you, Rachel, and now suddenly seeing that there's so many who are so eager to join, which is fantastic.
Let me ask Eduardo and Rachel about the future of sort of eco-labels here. We know full well there are 500 odd eco-labels in the world, and we still appear to have some kind of climate change and human rights issues to deal with. So eco-labels haven't entirely solved the problem. My favorite ever pointless eco-label, by the way, was the UN Global Compact, which, as far as I knew, didn't have a remit to launch such things. In a moment of particular delusion, decided to launch an eco-label that things were made with wind power, and it was called Wind Made logo that would go on products. And that for me was always my number one pointless eco label. And so we know these are not problem free, but I'd like to know, Eduardo and Rachel, where you see these fitting into consumer communications. Is it a B2B shift on, as Eva says, from circular to regenerative, and then we talk to the consumer about other issues? Or are we going to see this sort of tag appearing somewhere on forestry products or Patagonia clothes made with cotton that says regenerative? Eduardo, what do you think? As we head towards the end of the session, it's perhaps time to look to the future on this. What do you think?
Well, it's normal that we have such a huge amount. We're coming from different sectors, there are different levels, and different approaches. So this number is perfectly feasible. But I am sure that we will see a downboiling of them. And this will make consumers and the different companies engage living easier. And I think especially working between the sectors, as I said before, is important. Most likely the circular one is the first step. But circular for sure is not enough, because circular is not including the increase of demand, and sometimes also in some sectors, it's a kind of getting the raw material for free back in order to solve the landfill. And at the end, if we want as well, especially in and the renewables, to ensure sufficient living conditions, equal living conditions for people in the countryside, and we want them to use in a regenerative, in a sustainable way their land, agriculture. If their industry gets the raw material for free in order to solve a garbage problem, then we are not going to do it. And there is also a need for sufficient resources. So in that sense, I think we have to come to less babelism, to more agreed terms through the sectors, and to move further than just the circular. So important, it might be we have to go further. And what I get a little bit, I have difficulty a little bit with the regenerative term, because it is a process where you start from a worse situation, but we have fortunately good examples of agriculture, of forests, of agroforestry and so on, that are really very high standard. Some of them very historical traditional, and others have been developed in the last decade. So I can imagine thinking about a farmer or forest owner that thinks he or she has really a high standard. He may say, well, how can I regenerate what I have been able to keep in a good high standard? So it's not everything is destroyed. So, and I think it's as important as to try to solve the worst cases. We have also to recognize, award, and push the good examples in all the regions, because it's a single way that countries and farmers and so on will get motivated to see, look, I put always the example of Costa Rica is a really good example in Central America. And people in Honduras, in Guatemala, in other countries will eventually be more inspired to replicate the example of a neighboring country, so of a neighboring farmer that is doing things well, than the very far away one. So I think it is as important as trying to solve the worst examples we have. Frequently are related to wars, to unstable countries and failed states and so on, which is always a very complex way to come out. We have as well to focus on those countries and on those farmers, on those regions, on the companies that have been able to perform despite everything, to reach really inspiring examples and spreading them out, multiplying them. I think this positive approach, at least what I learned in my time of FAO in the UN, is going to motivate much more governments and civil society than the punishment on the worst cases, which frequently have a very, very weak problems behind.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so I think in summary, what I'm hearing is, there is no magic bullet. There are solutions which are needed different times in different places, and we need to focus on opportunity. And of course, regenerative has that about it, as we discussed earlier. So, Rachel, let me give the final comment to you as we close. If you can remember my question now, I think I'm struggling, but I'm sure you've got something to say to finish us off with. So, Rachel, over to you.
I don't know how inspiring I'll be, but I want to thank you for including us in this conversation and for bringing everyone together. I think you had asked about eco labels, and there are so many, and how are we supposed to distinguish between them? I think that the reason that we value labels and certification is that third-party verification that's outside of us. We're not saying trust us, we're doing the right thing. We're saying these people who are experts, who know what they're doing, looked at this and they evaluated that we're doing the right thing, and we can communicate that to you. And so, that is something that's very valuable to us. There are downsides of so many certifications, but I do think that we believe that there are really strong benefits of having that external verification and the third party, that third party component. So that's, I think potentially there could be a reduction in the number of labels and all of that. But I think, consumers want to know, how do we do this right? How do I do this better? I'm trying to do all these things and I just don't know. So what tools can we give them so that they can understand better, to enable them to make the right choices for themselves? And hopefully if more consumers make those choices, it'll drive more businesses to make different choices, right? Because that's all part of the system as well. So, but thank you so much for including us, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you. And I look forward to purchasing my next Patagonia goods and seeing how you're talking about your work on the labels. Although I'm patching up everything I've got
Good. That's what you should do.
It's my badge of honor. It's the only clothing I own where I don't really mind if I rip it. So I say, oh, I can do a little bit of virtue signaling now by repairing it.
Yeah, that's the point.
Not the main reason for doing it. The main reason is because it's so damn expensive. No, I'm just kidding. It's a wonderful product. Thank you so much. And what a great conversation. We all have a smile on our face when we talk about regenerative. That proves my point that it's a great term that we should use more of. But to Eduardo's point, we have to be careful how we use it. And to Eva's point, we very much have to think about the scale of ambition of what it offers us beyond just soil. So thank you all for joining us. I've gone 2 minutes over, for which I apologise, but we do have an 8-minute break before we talk about investors and their valuing of sustainability in about 8 minutes' time with my colleague Ian Welsh. So let us have our refreshment break and a virtual round of applause